All right, so continuing our to-do list from last week. So this is going to be a recap of HTML. We coded up a very basic to-do list where we can add items. So kind of just to review that, if I want to get this running, I can go live using live server. Looks like I did not do that. All right, so here's my to-do.html. Basically, a header here, we have an input field and a button. We've coded up the JavaScript so that when we type in an item, for example, if I need to do my laundry, I can type in laundry into the input. When I click the add button, it adds an item to an unordered list. So that's what the bullet point there is indicating. If you want to take a nap, if that's on our to-do list, we'll add it. The very last thing we accomplished with our last go through with this was that we can click on an item and actually strike through the item as if we're checking it off. And the design decision that I took was that we have the ability to both strike it and unstrike it. So for example, if we need for a reason we need to redo the task, we could uncheck it. Again, that might not make sense. Usually to-do lists are, you check it off and they're done completely. But yeah, so we have the ability to toggle the strike styling when we click on a list item. Right. So we accomplished that by adding an event listener. So we created a list item, but we added an event listener. What this does was when this event happens, in this case, click event, we will handle that via our toggle item state. So in that case, our toggle item state basically finds the list item in question. And again, this is where we can use the events object that is actually passed to our method automatically. This is not something that we're manually doing. We get an event object that has a wealth of information about the event. In this case, there's a target property, and that target property has information about the actual element that was responsible for the event. In this case, when we click on a particular item in our list, we have a particular ID that we get back, so we can find the proper list item to actually check off. Like we're not guessing as to which list item, but we actually know which one triggered the event. What questions you guys have about anything we did for the to-do list last week? Hopefully you guys were able to attempt it over the weekend if you didn't get to it last week, but I want to make sure we address any questions thus far.
So the trigger for the event was basically on click. So add event listener, click. How does it necessarily, I guess, is the 3 lines above new list item ID is equal to list item next ID? How does it know where you're clicking and not just clicking somewhere on the screen? So I know there's basically an on click kind of anywhere versus how does it know which item you're picking?
How does the logic know, or how does the web page associate my click with a particular item?
Yeah, that. I think
the second part, that I can't say for sure, as in I don't know the technical details to answer that correctly, but my assumption would be when you click on an item, like the browser page will take your click point and find which element is underneath it. And again, since each element takes up like the entire block, so I could click kind of anywhere in this block because this element is taking up the entire horizontal space. So I'm assuming there's something with the browser that takes a click point on your page and knows which element's underneath it. Again, I don't know the specifics of how it finds it, but for the most part, your page is not going to have overlapping elements. So each element has its own territory, so that an event can automatically be mapped to it based on the location and the whatever was clicked or pressed in that case. But yeah, sorry, I don't have a technical. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know the magic that goes through like how it actually finds it, but I assume the browser can do that pretty easily for us without us having to know how to do it. Fair question to ask. There's a lot of magic going on here. Okay, so again, we are controlling the CSS style. This is something we can do with JavaScript. So in this case, we call the style property, and then we have access to all the styling that this property might have. So text decoration is the way we can strike through an item or clear a strike through. We can do anything. We could, change color if we want to. So if we want to do list item style, I want to change the color of the text. Again, anything is really possible with JavaScript. You can manipulate the CSS as you wish. So let's change the coloring. So if it's not checked off, we'll have a standard black color. And if it is checked off, let's go with, just make it red. All right, so this is going to impact the color. Laundry. Add that. So now when I check it off, notice it becomes red. So you can do a whole list of things. Again, you can even change the bullet points. There's anything you do with CSS, JavaScript will give you access to if you want to manipulate it dynamically. All right, so let's get to our next item, or I guess next task, which is actually using local storage. So currently, when I go to this page, I can add items, but if I go back to it, like if I open up a new tab over here, it doesn't remember what I added. And that's not really useful in terms of a to-do list, because I might close it, come back, a couple days later, I want to see what items I had entered. So we probably want to persist the data somehow. And this is what local storage is useful for. Again, it's one way we can store data. There's also session storage. We use cookies. There might be other ways we get store data, but local storage is a convenient way, something that our browser provides, where we can just drop information in and extract information out as we need to. All right, so let's talk about doing that. So whenever we add an item, currently add task, we do a few items. We find the input element, find the parents, grab text, yada, yada. All right, this is where we actually create an item and store the value of the task. So when we're adding it, we should probably take the new task and add it to some container or some collection in our JavaScript. So I'm going to create a new item up here. Let's call it task list. And that will be an empty list. Let's start. I'll make sure I'm not colliding with. Name these a little better. Elements. So hopefully I don't have name conflicts. So task list is just my actual data. Task list element is my elements list from my HTML document. Hopefully that name distinction is clear enough. All right, so task list should just be a collection of tasks that we have. So in this case, when we add a task, let's add task to data. All right, so for now, task list is just going to be a string of, so it's going to be an array of strings. So task is just a string element or string data. We're just going to push that to a task list. And then our goal should be to persist that. So task list, that's where we use local storage. Again, local storage is a predefined object. This is not something I've created. You got to use the name local capital S storage. If you use some other name, it's not going to know what you're talking about. So in this case, local storage, there's a method called setItem. And setItem basically is going to take in a key and a value. So local storage works as a key value system. So you give it a key value and then, a key, and then a value you want to associate with it so that you can retrieve it using the same key. In this case, I'm going to call it, probably it's good to create a standard key for it. So let's say task list key. I'll call that tasks. The reason I created a variable is because if I want to reuse that key, it's best to kind of centralize that in one place. So we have tasks list, task, task. And this was the key I just created. So task list key. That's key, and we got to pass it a value. In this case, task list is what I want to store, everything in there, right? The problem here is local storage is basically just using strings. It's not smart enough, or it's not sophisticated enough to know how to store JavaScript specific elements. And again, keep in mind that JavaScript is just one language. You can use other languages with the web. So local storage is just a generic container. It's not specialized for JavaScript. In this case, I want to write out my task list, but task list isn't a JavaScript array. I can't just dump an array into local storage. I need to convert it to a string. And this is where we've mentioned before, you can use Json.Stringify. So Json.Stringify method. we've probably not talked about JSON too much. I don't think we've mentioned it. JSON is just a standardized way to represent data. So JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. It's just an agreed upon standard for, it's just used, JavaScript is used so prominently on the web. Developers kind of just agreed upon some string representation so that you can easily represent your JavaScript objects as strings and vice versa. You can take string representation and convert it back to JavaScript objects really easily. You don't want to do it manually. So JSON, this library will just give you access to Stringify, which means we'll take a JavaScript object, or when I say object, sorry, data type, not object. It'll take a JavaScript data type and convert it into a string representation. All right, so this will allow me to store my entire list into local storage as a string. So anytime I update it, I'm going to update local storage so that stays in sync. And then what else do I want to do? I also have another piece of data here. So in this case, I'm storing the strike through state. So maybe I want to actually jazz this up a bit. Let's say record equals. Actually, let's take this other step at a time. So I'm going to store it in local storage. I'm going to ignore the strike through state. And then, yeah, let's just see what this accomplishes for us. All right, so I'm going to bring up my property inspector. So that's going to be Command-Alt-I in Chrome. And then I want to look at my, what was it? Memory. Application, sorry. I want to go to my application tab and look at local storage. So hopefully you guys have something similar. In here, this was what I stored before. I was just testing out local storage, so I stored list 1, 2, 3, and 4. Let's actually delete local storage, the contents of local storage. So I'm going to do local storage clear, and that should clear. I probably could do it from this tab also somehow. Yeah, clear all would have done it. All right, so we have nothing in our local storage right now. Let's try adding a new task. So I'm going to do laundry. That's my default task. Click add. Notice I get a new key. The key value is tasks. So that's the value, the key I specified. And then I get a value of laundry. Notice it's in square brackets. So this is the string representation of my list. So if I add a new item, let's see actually see what happens. So let's say wash dishes. All right, so notice we appended to our list and basically rewrote the same list using the same key. So we didn't actually add another new record. We overwrote the existing record with our new list data. So in this case, our new array data. So in this case, we have laundry and wash dishes stored in one single key. All right, so again, the key here is json.stringify. We're converting a JavaScript data type into a string representation. All right, but now the key thing that we want to do is retrieve this data so that if I go to a new tab, so currently if I go to a new tab, notice, nothing's here, but if I open up my local storage, the data is still present. As in, I went to a new tab, the data is still there. I need to figure out a way to get this data and actually add it back to my web page kind of automatically. And this is where JavaScript will do the work for me. So I need to leverage that. So let's do that on window on load. So this is a method that automatically gets called when your web page loads. So I'm going to do some logic in there. You could technically not do this in window on load. You can kind of just code it out here, kind of like that global scope. That will work because whenever your browser gets done loading your JavaScript, it'll execute any of the lines of code that it sees. But I prefer to use on load just because it makes it clear that I want to do this when the page loads. So window.onload will execute it automatically for me. In this case, I want to see if I have anything in local storage. So to do that, I'm going to call local storage get item and pass it that key that I've specified. So pass this key, and this should give me back, let's just say data. All right, so this is the data that's stored in local storage. This, again, is a string representation of actually what I care about. So in this case, I should probably check if data, not data, then that means we have nothing stored in local storage. It's probably just do it this way. So if data is something valid, so that means it's not null, we want to do something with it. So in this case, we have our task list up here. So I want to do json.parse. So parse is the opposite of stringify. Stringify, which we use down below here. This will convert it to string data. Parse will take string data and convert it back to a JavaScript data type. So in this case, I'm going to just pass it data, and then that should convert it back to a list. And then once we have our list, we probably want to load that into our, what is it? Our unordered list. So I'm actually going to probably break apart add task into two separate functions. So in this case, new task is what we should pass in.
Sorry, I know you've gone over this a lot of times, but I'm still a little bit confused on the JSON parse.
Sure. So JSON parse is going to take in JSON, what's the word I'm looking for? JSON representation or JSON format. Yeah, so it's going to take a JSON formatted string value, and then it's going to convert that to an actual JavaScript data type. So in this case, it's going to convert it back to a list because that's how we stored it. So we want to look at JSON formatting. Again, this is just a standardized way to represent data. So W4D5 schools, always good to use. Again, it's just, it can take an object. So in this case, it might be kind of hard to see, but these are curly braces. So if you had a JavaScript object, so that's where you have key value pairs. If you have that data structure, and again, if you want to write it out to like a text file, again, you would need to use Stringify so that you can convert something that's in JavaScript out to just a text format. Because again, usually we use text in databases and CSV files. So we need to convert it into a textual representation.
So at what point is our data getting turned into a JSON? Is it when we are storing it in local storage?
Yeah, so JSON is just it's a format, it's a string format that's used with JavaScript. So it's a string representation of JavaScript lists or objects or sets or anything that's specific in JavaScript. It will just convert that to text. That's the whole point of JSON. So again, JSON stands for JavaScript object notation. And the reason that's a standard is because there's libraries built around it so that JSON.parse can take in something that's formatted in JSON and automatically know how to convert that to a JavaScript object. So this just does a bunch of magic for us. Well, it takes in string, like a string representation of what we had before, and gives us JavaScript data or data types. I'm not sure if that clarified anything, but again, Stringify goes the opposite direction. But we're working in a JavaScript application and we want to just write it out to a text file. We can use Stringify to write out all of our data as a text representation. Again, because we can't just say, hey, here's a JavaScript array and put it into a text file, because there's no real mapping between an array in memory and a text data file.
So sorry, I know I'm a little bit.
No apologies, that's right, go for it.
So do you need to stringify something before you store it in local storage? Is that, I guess I'm a little bit confused. You said yes?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
Local
and
storage,
then you have to parse it.
Yeah, you can imagine local storage is kind of just like a glorified text file. So everything you store in local storage has to be text. And when I say text, I mean string data, right? But when you're working in JavaScript, not all your variables are string data, right? You might have, again, our common examples are arrays or dictionaries. Sorry, not dictionaries, getting Python confused. Arrays or objects. Those are complicated data structures that somehow we need to convert it into a string format so that we can write it to a text file. Because text files only know data as characters, right? Text files aren't smart enough to kind of have different data types in there. It's all text. So Stringify, yep, we'll convert it all to text, and then parse does the opposite direction. It will take something that is JSON format and then convert it back to JavaScript data types. Again, if you just pass in some garbage to parse, well, it's not going to give you anything useful. Like parse is not going to magically know how to convert whatever you're passing to it back into JavaScript. It's got to be JSON formatted data. So again, JSON is a standard. you guys can look up JSON, just the particulars of how to format it. But again, it's just a common agreed upon standard that everyone basically uses. So, that we know how to work with like different formats, right? It'd be really complicated if I just had my own formatting and handed my code to James, be like, hey, write some code that works with my data. He's gonna be like, well, I got to know the particulars, how it's formatted, all the particulars of it. But JSON is just the format that pretty much everyone goes with. Okay, so great questions. So again, parse is taking our string data that was stored in local storage and converting it back to a JavaScript array. All right, so we should get our task list back, and then we probably want to loop over our task list. So we'll do for let I equals 0. Actually, yeah, I equals 0. I will be less than task list dot length, and we'll just iterate through that. So we're going to go through our task list that we just created here from our local storage. Probably do that in our if statement, and then we probably want to add task, and this would be task list. So each item we want to add one by one. So we need to modify my methods here. So say add task to page. I'm going to create a new method called add task to page. And this will take in task name. And I'm going to relocate a lot of this logic that I wrote above. And hopefully I don't break my code. So here, this takes in the task name. Yeah, this. So I gotta reorganize my code a little bit. So we get the new task, and then we want to call add task to page, the function we just created with new task. And then we still want to clear our input, so we'll do input dot value is clear. All right, so this should be relocated to here. And I renamed it to task name. Any questions while I'm kind of reorganizing this? Basically, I broke apart my previous function so that I could reuse that logic. Task name gets patched to task list, and then task list gets converted in 2 steps to make it clear. So data equals that, and call that string data. If you want to make that a little more obvious what it is, so we call it string data. My Python and JavaScript standards used. So we use camel case in JavaScript, not underscores. That was my fault. There we go. String data. Okay, so create that function. We call that from our add task. This is our, again, event handler. When we click the button, add task it's called. From that, we actually grab the input element, grab the value from the input element, and then call add task to page, which takes in a task name, which does everything for us that we were doing before. Assuming I didn't screw anything up here. So now that I have that function, I can call add task to page. Each of these items will be a string value that I stored before. So let's see if that kind of works. So here we want to convert string stored in local storage to JS. And then we want to add each task. Okay, so let's see if everything works correctly. If not, I'm definitely going to miss something when I remodeled everything. All right, so I'm going to refresh this. All right, nothing happens. I still have my tasks in here. So I have laundry and wash dishes, but when I refresh, nothing gets added. So I need to debug this. Let me kill my window here. I'm gonna go to run debug.
There might be a problem over there. I think you made a mistake where you were typing the task name or whatever.
Gotcha. All right. Great that you guys might have spotted my error mistake. What was that, Musa? Was it when I renamed something down here?
The JS file, yeah. When you were changing the task name, no, the task data or something like that. When you were changing it.
String data?
Oh, string data. Yeah.
Right here.
Scroll
Gotcha.
down. Yes.
I think I definitely missed it here. String data. Scroll down.
I think you might have used S instead of D in one of them. I thought I saw something, but
yeah,
he got it.
I think I fixed that. Yeah, so I think I didn't forget to rename. So again, renaming, I probably should be using find and replace more than just doing manually. So I forgot to update that. Let's see if that makes a difference. Nope, but I probably don't have anything in local storage right now. Let's move this downward. Blow up my console. Okay, hopefully you guys can read that. Application and local storage. Yeah, I don't have anything in there, so I brought up a new separate browser. So let's add some tasks, laundry and wash dishes. All right, so my local storage has a record, tasks, and the value that I'm storing. Let's go to a new tab and see if those get restored. So again, not there, but we can debug. That's the whole point of debugging. Always can mess something up. So I'm going to put a breakpoint on window on load. So it will let me. Maybe it will let me. Maybe one right here. Okay, let's refresh our page and we should hit that breakpoint. But we are not. Why are we not hitting it? Yeah, so it seems my window on load is not even getting called. I need to reload this. Okay. Why is that not getting hit? Window on load JavaScript. Shouldn't have to call that myself, should I? All right, maybe we need to actually call onload. Thought that automatically gets called. Maybe I am mistaken. So I have my body element here, onload. I want to call onload. No, sorry. I am pretty sure you do not need to do this. So I'm going to research a bit more. Window.onload. Not working. Seems like there's a result for that. Okay, so it seems like similar to what I'm encountering. JavaScript event window on load, not happening. All right, so I definitely don't have an onload earlier. Anyone happen to know how this onload magic works? So window.onload. All right, easy enough to fix this then. Let's say initialize.
Looks like window on load actually needs a name function.
Not sure what you mean by that.
Well, I'm looking at something that's not a fat arrow example, but it's window.onload equals function blah, blah, blah.
Okay. That should be similar. We could try that. So function onload. Yeah, we can try that. So yeah, it's not sure what's going on here. So we are debugging with this window, I believe. I'm just going to create a function of my own called initialize data, and I'll call that myself. I don't know if that will alleviate the issue. So the const initialize data. That'll be that error syntax. All right, so basically whenever this file loads, when it gets to line 5, I'll actually call my function here. So let's see if that works. Got a bunch of breakpoints. All right. So let's try this one more time. Refresh. Refresh for you. All right. And some debugging issues. Let me stop this. It'll let me. All right. Let's try that whole process again. Go to my HTML file, hit debug in Chrome. Okay, still do not hit that. Something seems to speak right now. All right, so I did not even hit that breakpoint. I don't know if my breakpoints are being screwy. Let's see if an alert pops up. So I'm going to type in alert. So this automatically should show me something in my browser if it actually gets hit. Let's restart that. All right, so we do get that pop up. The question is, why don't we get our, all right, so we finally hit our breakpoint. Not sure why we weren't hitting it before. Local storage. All right, I'm a little stumped here. We're hitting this alert for sure. We have all these breakpoints. There. So local storage get item, task list key. That seems okay. Let's try it again. Sorry for the technical difficulties here. Not quite sure what's going wrong. All right, so we have our alert. So that's, our JavaScript file is definitely being executed. We get to initialize data, so that's good. But for some reason, we're not getting into here. All right, well, now we do. I wonder if it's, yeah, maybe the hoisting is that working correctly. So, all right, seems to be working now. I'm not sure what was wrong before. So if we look at task list, this has length of 13,000. So something definitely wrong there. Let's look at string data here. All right, so string data has a crazy amount of items in it. I'm not sure how I screwed that up. So laundry, wash dishes. I think I know what's going on. Does anyone guess at what's going on here? It's definitely not obvious, and obviously I've been kind of coding kind of quickly. So the problem here is I'm calling add task to page, which is actually updating my local storage again. So I'm calling set item on it. So updates local storage. So that's probably not ideal. Since I'm reading from local storage, I need to add back to it. So I probably need to control that in some manner. Maybe I could take this and put that in my previous method.
Seems like since you've read all of the contents of your old local storage in, you don't care about writing to it. It's okay.
Yeah, you're right. It's probably not the source of my error, but for some reason I got like 13,000 items in my local storage, which is not what I expected. That's a lot of tasks to do, even in the weekend. So why would that happen? So test length, test page. All right, let's try running this again. And Chrome. Okay. Get our alerts. Thank you for reading. Okay, so let's try adding some items here. I think my local storage might have a lot of items in it. Bring that up, application. Yeah, so my local storage got corrupted, so I'm just going to delete it. Let's try adding items one by one. So laundry, even that one's not adding it. All right, sorry, so really broke my code here. Let's take our time with it instead of rushing it. So add task should find our input, grab a new task, add task to page. Might be something wrong in here. That one executes. What's going on with my code here? that work. All right, laundry. Step through it. So I'm gonna hit the, the arrow that has the dot underneath it. It's gonna go line by line. All right, let's go into it. So I actually want to go into this function. If I actually, don't care about this function, I can step over it, which will mean it will execute everything and go to the next line. But if I actually want to dive into this function, I want to go into step into, which is F11, and I'll actually go into that function. So I actually want to see what's going wrong here. This all should be good. Task name, laundry, yep. Okay. That seems to have worked correctly. Okay. Oh wait, so task list seems to have failed. Why would that fail? Ah, I know what happens. So we initialize task list up here, but then initialize data actually overwrites task list if we have something stored in there. So we need to make sure task list is something valid. So I try that again and go to a breakpoint right over here. All right, so task list is 0. We should be able to push to it then. Task name. Task name is invalid. Let me just rename it here. All right, so task name was invalid. So again, this was JavaScript. It kind of fails silently. It'd be nice to see an error so I could actually locate the error. So task name, let's see if that fixes it. Hello, laundry, add that. Okay, we're back to being able to add an item here. So let's look at our local storage. Okay, we have one item. Let's add one more, wash dishes. All right, so our list seems to be getting created correctly. Let's see when we load a new page, what happens. Okay, we still haven't loaded what we wanted.
Can you look at the, there you go.
So, okay, our test list looks correct. Let's go back to what we're trying to do before. So I'm going to put a breakpoint into initialize data, reload my page. Okay, so let's take it line by line. Let's make sure every value that we expect is what we expect it to be. So I'm going to step over string data, or what we call get item, and look at string data. So string data, it looks like, yep, it looks like again, string representation of an array. So that's why we have square brackets. This is in quotes. So again, this is string data. So string data is something. Continue. Now let's see if Json.parse actually converts this to a list. Maybe it could be failing. So there could be an issue there. Task list. Nope. So notice now it's actually a JavaScript array. So I have indices. JavaScript knows that this is an array. So it looks like my task list is correct. Let's see what our iteration is doing. So step into add test page. I should get laundry from index 0. So if I step into here, that's crashed. I think that crashed. Okay, so we're narrowing down our problem. Let's try that party again. Okay, so task list here has 2 items. It has laundry and wash dishes. What is my I value? I value 0, so I would expect this to find it, but it seems like there's a problem with hoisting here. So I bet it doesn't know what add task to page is, because it seemed like I had to move my initialized data down here. So I'm a local here, so it's hoisting and JavaScript. All right, Stack Overflow. When can I use a function before it's defined in JavaScript? The function declaration magic. Okay, so seems like I can't use fat arrow functions and get hoisting with it. So, all right, let's convert these to functions and see if that fixes it. So it's going to change my fat arrows functions to the normal functions. Seems like that's what Stack Overflow was suggesting might be an issue. So function. State and function add task to page, function add task. We don't need to change this one since this is called from a page, but all right, so we get rid of fat arrow syntax. That might be messing up our hoisting. Okay, get rid of our breakpoints. Okay, so we have this. Let's add one more task. What else do we need to do? Let's say eat dinner or make dinner. All right, so we add that. It's a phantom breakpoint here. VS Code is always not the best. Okay, so we have 3 items: laundry, wash dishes, make dinner. Let's go to that same page on a new tab to see if that pulls it up. Hit hello. All right, there we go. So it seems like I was relying on hoisting. Again, hoisting is the idea in JavaScript where you can call something before it's been declared. So in this case, I'm declaring my function on line 9, but I'm actually calling it line 7. It seems like, based on what I ran into, you can't do that with fat arrow functions. So you can't call something that's created later with fat arrow functions. Right, so actually it has to know the value of initialized data as it's creating this file. So it seems like you can't just assign to it and then call it beforehand. That's good to know. I did not know that offhand, so lesson learned. All right, so
go through and put in fat arrow functions and make sure that everything was ahead of where it's called, and then it would work okay, maybe.
Yeah, we could do that. So yeah, I could try to make sure my ordering is correct. In this case, this function is calling another function, so I need to have initialized data after add task to page. Again, if these were fat arrow functions, but I'd rather take advantage of hoisting, so I'm just going to use a regular function syntax here. Get rid of my alerts. I think my code's working as I wish. So to kind of review, Json.parse will take in string data. You get string data back from local storage. So that's what's happening here. I have my key, which is where I stored my data. I get that data back, assuming it's correct, or probably should check if it's not null, not empty. We get a task list and go through the motions there. All right. Any questions on local storage? Again, local storage, high level, is pretty simple. All you got to worry about is set item and get item. The key thing to know is the data you're storing has to be in string data. So if you're working with objects or arrays or any complicated data structure, you need to use JSON to convert it back down to a string.
So
you can export integers. Like if I had an integer value and pass it here, it'll automatically be converted to a string. So you got to keep that in mind. So again, if I had like value equals 7 and then pass in value into my local storage, when I take it out, this is actually gonna be a string value of 7. It's not gonna be an integer. Again, it's a text. Local storage is effectively a text file. So when I pull this out, again, I'm gonna need to convert a string of 7 back to an integer or a numeric value if I actually want it to be an integer or a numeric value in JavaScript. Sorry, Don, did you have a question?
Yeah, if we had a different application in that other tab and accessing value from local storage with the same key, does it get the same stuff or is it its own stuff?
Good question. So local storage, I think, is shared between pages. So if we create a new page, let's give that a try. So let's say, I have to create a new file here. Let's call it monday.html. Move that over here and quickly create an HTML document, HTML base. And let's just say h1 happy Monday. All right, so this is a separate page. The question is, do we still have access to the same data if we want it? So if I bring this up, let's go here. I want to go to monday.html. If I don't, let's type it. All right, so we get happy Monday. Question is, do we have access to the same data? Local storage is still present here. So notice we still have tasks and the tasks from our other page. So yeah, local storage is shared by the entire browser. It's not page specific. So if we had, if we had a to-do list here and want to do something else with that data, we totally could. So local storage is client side, and again, it's managed by the user. So if I want to delete this data, I can. If other pages want to use this data, they're free to use it on the client side.
So in real life, would we tend to put like a little hash key in front of our key name so that other people probably don't see it?
Hash key. I'm not sure what you mean by hash key.
To pick a key that is not likely to be used by another application.
Yeah. So yeah, okay. So if this Happy Monday or this Monday page happened to have like logic that used tasks, but it assumed tasks was something else, yeah, you could get collisions there. So yeah, you definitely want unique names, so that you lessen the chance of having collisions. Local storage isn't used that often. Usually you're going to have cookies that are stored by like pages that you visit. Local storage is just one place you can store your own data for your personal use. And then also session storage, which is per session. So if I close this window, session storage will be cleared, local storage will be persisted. But there's also cookies. So if I go to cookies, there could be stuff stored in my cookies here. That's the common way that many web pages store data. So cookies are unique, like they probably have a unique key. So you're not going to get conflicting name, like cookies aren't based off the name, as far as I know. So yeah, usually, yeah. So to summarize, yeah, you usually want your keys to be unique enough where you likely won't collide with naming with other pages that you use. But yeah, it's pretty generic. Again, it's just a text file. It's not going to be smart enough to know like, hey, you're calling me from a separate place. Let me give you back separate data. Okay, so I think we accomplished our task of actually persisting data. Any questions on using local storage? Again, I think the issue I ran into kind of detracted from what we're trying to accomplish, but again, it's as simple as calling get item. And then just keep in mind that if you have something that's a list, array, or anything that's complicated, JSON should be the way you should store and retrieve your data. So Json Stringify, when you're calling set item, I can find it in my code up here. So JSON Stringify, when you're calling set item, make sure you're passing it a string value. You can't just give it a list or an object and expect it to work. All right, so I converted to string data using Json Stringify, and I extracted out using Json.parse. So initialized data gets called when I load my page initially. So from line 5, I'll call my function when this loads. All right, so that takes care of data persistence using local storage. Again, if there's any questions, feel free to ask.
Hey, Ankur, I just want to make sure I heard you right. So you said earlier, if you try to take that 7 as a number and it goes into a string.
Yep.
So the JSON Parse basically converts it back to a number, back to the original state.
That's a great question. I don't think it's going to be that smart, but we could try it out quickly. So let's store a new value. Let's call local storage number, and we're number, and let's just store 7 as an example. Question is, if we try to pull that out, so let me just do it here in my initialized data, number equals local storage that get item, and some number was my key. And let's see what happens if we try to do Json.parse. I'm actually curious. I assume it'll keep it as a string because it's you can store like the string of 7 in local storage as well. So if I do number value, let's actually see what happens. Breakpoint there, refresh. So basically it did all this stuff. It called local storage up here, and I did that wrong. Get set item. And get item. All right, refresh. It's taking its time. Okay. Okay, so some number was stored as 7. It doesn't have quotation marks. Maybe it's stored as a number, but I think it should be a string. So, well, was that my breakpoint? No. All right, so number value is actually a string. So notice the quotation marks. When I call get item or so number, it's a string. Question is, does Json.parse convert it to a number? My guess is no, but that's why we're checking it out. Actually, looks like it does. So I'm not sure how you persist, I guess, a string value of 7 in that case. So I guess if you want the string value, you just call get item. I guess Json.parse is smart enough to know if it's a number or not. So in this case, it looks like it actually converted back to a number. If I stored something like 7n, I'm not sure what that would convert it to. So let's give that a quick try. If we're on this path. All right, so number value is x. Okay. Continue. 7. Try that again. All right, so number value should be 7nx. Let's see if Json.parse somehow knows to just get 7. Looks like it totally failed on that. So if you don't pass it something that it can convert, it looks like it freaks out. Yeah, because it never got to my alert here.
So I guess you put the 7 in quotations because that's considered a string. I guess it'll come back as a string, but I guess if you put no quotation, it comes back as an integer.
I don't
Seems
think
like.
so. So even if I store this at quotation 7, if I do Json.parse, number value here is always going to be a string. So if we call that, string data again. So this is always going to be a string. No matter what you store in local storage, it's going to come back to you as a string. Json.parse, again, I think it's smart enough to know if you have a number as a string, it'll convert it back to a number. If you call Json.parse, so in this case, I'm passing quotation 7 here. Let's see what happens when I run this again. It's not what I want. I always want to run my HTML file, not my JavaScript file.
Or it with quote marks, it's going to come back with quote marks in a string.
Is that right? So 7nx. Some number equals 7. All right, let's run that. Why is it still 7nx? So local storage again here. Sorry, I'm having some debugging issues this morning. I feel like my code is not actually doing what I expected to do. Like this never got hit. I'm not sure why. I don't know if it's like caching my JavaScript somehow, or if it's just the case of the Mondays. Deletes. All right, for some reason, it's not even hitting line 7 anymore. I'm just gonna cut my losses here. Not sure why VS Code is being weird. So it definitely should have hit this because it called line 5 here. Maybe because it blew up there. That might be my best guess. So maybe initialized data is not completing, so JavaScript throws an exception, and I don't actually get to do what I want. So, okay, so in this case, I have 7 there. I get string data out. Does Json.parse do stuff correctly? No, because I renamed it. A lot of mistakes today. All right, so the whole lesson here was if I store 7 as a string, it's going to come back as a string. Will Json.parse know I saved that as a string? My answer is going to be no. If I step over this, yeah, num is converted back to an int. So if you pass Json.parse something that could be a number as a string, they'll convert it back to a number. If you pass it something that's not convertible, Json.parse will, seems like it'll throw an exception, and that's usually not a good thing.
Appreciate it.
Yep, no, thanks for asking questions. I always appreciate questions. All right, last thing I want to do is talk about Bootstrap, because that's something I'm not sure if we've gone over too extensively. Always good to get more experience. So looking at my page here, nothing too jazzy going on here. Let's try to add some Bootstrap styling. So one thing that's really easy to add is some Bootstrap styling for buttons. So let's go to Bootstrap and read about it. So Bootstrap buttons, search, Google search it, should find what I'm looking for. Buttons and Bootstrap. All right, so the whole idea of Bootstrap is that people have created a CSS styling for us already, so that we don't manually have to write the CSS ourselves. Again, we totally can. It'll require more effort, and obviously they've spent the time ahead of time, so they have buttons that kind of look nice. They have different themes, like you could use outline buttons. They have other classes, so again, they've done a lot of CSS coding for us. So if we want to use this, we totally can. So Bootstrap is open source. So if I want to use, like, let's say I want my button to be like a warning button, all I had to do is follow their coding example and use class button and button warning. That should convert my button to automatically use this styling. I shouldn't have to write any CSS for it. So I'm going to copy that class and go back to my page over here. So my button is my HTML, and it's down here, add button, on click. What I want to do here is add a class so that it knows, let me put that after my ID. So now it's going to inherit any class that gives styling for button and button dash warning. These two classes are defined by Bootstrap. So right now, as I have it right now, this is not going to change my styling at all, because these classes have no definition. If I go to my own style.css, this is the only thing I've defined. I've defined a body selector and a class selector for stripe. Right? I could create a button class. So if I want to do that, I could totally do that. So background color, let's put hot pink. If I do that, save this. Thank you. Notice that my button's now pink. Right? I created that style. But if I didn't want to do that myself, because it's still could use some polishing, I can use Bootstrap. But the way to use Bootstrap is you need to read their documentation. So if you go to the Getting Started tab, they basically provide you all the items you need to include in your HTML so that it'll work correctly. So in this case, I need to copy this line. It's kind of long. This is basically saying use this style sheet as well. So if I paste that into my HTML, we go to the header. So notice I have a link to my own style sheet here, right? Styles.css is my file, but I can drop in another link, again, link style sheet, and href is now whatever they told us to link to us. So if I actually copy the URL that they gave us for the style sheet and drop that into my browser, the file that I get back is actually going to be, this is a CSS file. Notice how much CSS coding they have in here, right? If I take away .min, I'd probably get the nicely formatted one. All right, so min is just basically a condensed, like textually condensed version. If you take away the .min for Bootstrap files, it'll actually show it to you in a nicer format, basically a more human readable format. All right, so again, this is just CSS styling. There's a whole list of it. If I actually search this file and look for button dash warning, this class, again, is already defined. And it's giving it a color. I assume this color is yellow, or again, the background color is yellow, foreground color is whatever color that is. But yeah, so it's already specifying the styling that I want. So I can just use this class now, which I already kind of dropped into my HTML. So now button warning actually has some styling associated with it, and that's coming from this CSS file. All right, let me go back to my script file. All right, that's fine. So if I refresh my page, hopefully that alert's gone. Let me get rid of this because I want that alert to keep popping up.
Also line 5.
Oh, did I have an alert there?
It has a local storage.
Okay, yeah, that's kind of hurt functionality, but okay. So here, notice my button's a nice, amber yellow color. That is coming from Bootstrap. So if I went back to that button page, again, it's using this warning button. Again, I could use any of their predefined styles. The key thing here, if you remember about style sheets, is that you can override styles based on the ordering. So in this case, let's say I don't like the border of this. Let's say, there's no border right now. It's kind of just, empty. It's the same as the background color. Let's say I want to add bordering. I can still do that to Bootstrap elements. So I get all the styling that Bootstrap gives me, and I could add on to it or replace it as I wish. And the way you would do that is with your own style sheet. So I have my own style sheet here. I'm going to create a selector for the same class, button warning. In this case, let's say I want to add a border. Border will be, let's see, black. I always forget the ordering here, so it's solid. I'm gonna look this up. Order.
The order for it doesn't matter in border.
Oh, I actually never knew that. Thanks. That will save me lookups in the future. So let's say I want to do a 4-pixel border, which is kind of thick. Want it to be solid. Maybe let's do dotted, just get a little crazy. And then I want it to be colored black. So if I save that, now it's going to use everything that my CSS was inheriting. So I'm going to get all of this by default. And I'm basically adding a new property here called border. So I'm actually not overriding anything from here per se, but I can still modify my page, my button. So if I save that, notice I get this weird dotted line around my button. All right, so I've basically added on to that style, but I could override it also. Let's say I don't want my text to be black. Let's say I want that to be white. I can change that in my styling. So I do color equals white. I think that should do it. Refresh. All right, notice that my text color for the button became white. Even though I'll look at the style right here, they provide some color here. I've overridden it now. The way the override works is, again, if you remember CSS, the ordering of your links or your how you include your CSS files. So in this case, line 5 is where I include the Bootstrap styling, and then line 6 is where I include my own. Since line 6 is after line 5, anything in my styles that kind of override what Bootstrap's doing is going to get applied. But if I swap the ordering there, so if I swap line 6 and, or sorry, line 6 and line 5, now my style sheet is going to get loaded first, and then Bootstrap styles will get loaded. In this case, anything in Bootstrap will override any of the styles that I have in here if they have the same name. So in this case, button warning, I'm providing 2 styles here, border and color. But if I look at the CSS file from Bootstrap, they also specify color for border button warning. So in this case, this color is going to get honored because that comes second in like the loading. It comes after my style sheet got loaded. So this color will be applied rather than the color I specified. And everyone, kind of how the ordering impacts which style gets chosen. All right, so notice I'm back to here. Even my border got removed. So I'm pretty sure that button, if I search for the button class in my CSS, button, how do I find button? Might take a little bit of searching. All right, there we go, button. So button is also a class I'm using for my particular button. And notice it has border radius. It has a border. So its border is 1 pixel, solid and transparent. So I'm not sure the point of a transparent border, but there's probably some purpose there. So this border is overriding the border that I specified here. And this basically got blown away because that came second in the ordering.
Your warning, you got a border color in the Bootstrap.
Pardon?
In the button warning, it also had border color. So what was that?
Button warning. Okay, yeah. So it looks like it basically it's matching the background color and border color here.
Made your border disappear.
Yeah, effectively, yeah. It has a border, but that border is just the same color as the background, so it you can't see it. So was there a question there, or were you just kind of asking about what this is doing?
No, I was just going to say that border color was specified after your border color, so it made your border disappear.
Gotcha. Yep. Yeah. So again, the ordering of your CSS matters. So in this case, yep, border color here is going to override anything that I set. And the reason is because I've chosen to load CSS at the Bootstrap after my own styles. Usually I would do it the other way around, as in I would take whatever Bootstrap gives to me, and then if I want to customize it to whatever I want it to be, I should have control over that. So that's why usually I load my styles afterwards. In this case, if I want to change like the color and the border, I have the ability to do so. So now that I swapped them, we should get back to what we had before, which is a dotted border and the text is white. Again, there's those pseudo states. So in this case, hover. It looks like I need to update the hover because my text changed back to black. So there's a few more things I need to override if I still want like the text to stay the same, and like the hover functionality, maybe the other aspects.
So when you specify the Bootstrap style sheet, you change your 400 character application to a 2 meg application. And is that always going to be like that, even if there's a lot of code that you're not using in that style sheet?
Are you asking? So the file, like my HTML file is still the same size. I guess when it loads it, yeah, it's going to load all this. I'm not sure if sizing is a concern. But yeah, it's going to load all the styles, even if you're not going to use them. So I'm not sure that there's a good way to isolate them. I don't think Bootstrap provides just like pieces for each component. I guess you could copy it out of the main file and separate it out if you want to do it that way, but I've never really done that. I kind of just accept like, yeah, you're gonna get a lot of CSS, but I don't think it weighs down your application, that performance that much. There again, there's a whole list of elements you can use. There's some, nice ones that kind of make your site a little more jazzier. I think one that I love to use is Carousel. So if you're not familiar with Carousel, it's just the idea that you could have like a slideshow basically. It's kind of cool. So you have images here. You could use that as your background. So background image using Bootstrap. I'll find an example of this. I have done this before. Again, it's not always trivial, but again, Bootstrap makes your life easier, as in it has some cool components that you can use. All right, so how do I run this? Show me anything? It's still loading. Maybe it's just template code. But trying to find an example where they use I think the next one maybe. But again, set a cool effect to your background where you have images that can rotate. Just want an example here. Okay, I'm failing at finding an example, but again, you guys can kind of envision it. Just using this component, you just have a bunch of images that kind of automatically rotate in your background. Kind of look cool. Again, you could have controls to the different versions of it where I could slide through it myself, or you could leave off those buttons. There's many configurations here. You'd have tabs that you can click on. But yeah, this one's a pretty cool component. Not the easiest to kind of drop in use. You gotta make sure you read kind of how to use these the slides correctly. There's Jumbotron, which is something like this. Cards, again, you'll see this on many websites. So like cards where you have some text and an image kind of nested in there. Like Airbnb, I think, uses it. Go to airbnb.com if they give us a good example. Loading something there. Not sure why my internet is so slow. Come on, load there. All right, my internet seems to have gone off to lunch, but so I'm failing at finding good examples for you. But again, Bootstrap's used a lot. Again, it's just pre-coded CSS, can kind of get your website to look kind of nice without too much effort. So with that, any questions on using Bootstrap? Do you guys want to see another example? I was trying to find examples online, but we could kind of go about doing a particular example if you guys want to see it.
One other question, and when you picked a button because you like the color and the shape theoretically, but it had text for screen readers. So even somebody that was using it with a screen reader would end up with the wrong description of the button. So
I'm not sure what a screen reader is. I apologize.
Somebody is blind using the application.
Okay, so what was the issue with that, or what was the question?
Bootstrap provided text for the button that said it was a warning button. So somebody went down there wanting to add a laundry, something to their laundry list, and they'd end up with a warning button.
Gotcha. Yeah, I just went with it for the color, but yeah, there might be some additional functionality that button warning provides. Okay, cool. Again, Bootstrap, just again, it's optional use. You can sell your own components. Usually, it'll take longer if you sell it yourself. If you want to just get something up quick and running that looks kind of nice and professional, Bootstrap is one of the many libraries you can use. There's also Material UI. You can look for other libraries out there that kind of, again, just have already created styles for you so you don't have to do it yourself. Especially for those of you that don't like CSS and kind of get frustrated by it or just don't like the designing aspect, that's where using Bootstrap would probably be a godsend there. Okay, with that, I'm gonna stop the recording here. And